Hello, and welcome to the APICS webinar, Brexit, the Supply Chain Professional Perspective, presented in association with the Cranfield School of Management. My name is Jennifer Storelli, Associate Editor at APICS. Please note this presentation is being recorded and will be available at apics.org/online events starting early next week. Before we begin, I'd like to run through a few details. At the end of the presentation, we'll save time for a question and answer session. If you look at the right toolbar on your screen, you'll see a questions box. To ask your question at any time during the presentation, simply type it in the box and click send. Should you experience any technical difficulties during today's broadcast, please call GoToWebinar Tech Support at 1-805-617-7000. Again, that's 1-805-617-7000. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Jonathan Thatcher, CSCP, CAE.
Hello and welcome everyone to this webinar, Brexit, the Supply Chain Professional Perspective. There is such a big topic. This is such a big topic to talk about in such limited time. I'd like to jump right on in. So hopefully you're seeing the slides change on your screen, and I'll go ahead and introduce our panel. First off, I am the moderator, Jonathan Thatcher, and I'm responsible for research here at APICS. The research team researches everything that stands between end-to-end supply chain management, and so that's a broad range of topics, including Brexit. And I also write the Ask APICS column in the APICS magazine, and I am a firm believer that good questions lead to good research. So I welcome your questions at any time, both in the magazine, but especially in this webinars. And if you have questions, please type them into the chat function or let them flow through as you feel like altering or changing them as you hear questions and comments through the webinar, and we'll be happy to take as many as we can. All right, with that out of the way, let me introduce our panelist. Our first panelist is Sean Kelly. Sean is a founder and principal consultant at Allied Integration. He's a member of the European leadership team of the APICS Supply Chain Council. He's a certified SCORE trainer. He is a keynote speaker and an author and a writer for many different publications, such as the European Business Review. I could go on and on, but I'd like to introduce Sean Kelly.
Hi, Jonathan. Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce our second panelist. His name is Jeff LeClaire. He's Vice President of Manufacturing and Supply Chain at Basin Industries. And Basin Industries is an industrial manufacturing holding and operating company serving the global heavy industry marketplace. Jeff looks after production systems, material handling, value stream transformation, and new acquisition transformations. And he does all that with extensive experience and background in lean manufacturing, including at Toyota and the Toyota Production System, TPS, and at Caterpillar and its supply chain management practices. I introduce Jeff LeClaire.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. And I'd like to introduce our third and final panelist, Dr. Richard Wilding. He is a full professor and chair of the Supply Chain Strategy Center for Logistics and Supply Chain Management at Cranfield University School of Management in the United Kingdom. He is a top expert and leader in logistics and supply chain management in the areas of innovation, collaboration, supply chain risk and vulnerability reduction, and cost reduction. And he has truly helped many people and companies in a very distinguished career. Now, I could go on and on about honors of all our panelists, but it is indeed a powerhouse panel for Brexit. But I know there's a lot to cover here, so let's just jump right on into the webinar. And to do that, oh, sorry, Richard, I apologize. I didn't give you a chance to say hello. Thank you.
No, hello everybody.
Okay.
Too many people are joining us.
All right. Well, first of all, I just want to do a 50,000-foot view of what is Brexit and what happens next. So, of course, Brexit is short for British exit. It's a referendum that took place back on June the 23rd, a little over a month ago, to decide whether the United Kingdom should leave or remain in the European Union. The leave vote won by 52% to 48%. And many things are happening, but at least two things will happen. Number one is the UK will formally invoke Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty to end its EU membership. Now, invoking Article 50 starts a negotiation process between the UK and the EU, and that could take as long as 2 years for that to complete. A second step will be that the UK Parliament will vote on altering or repealing the 1972 European Communities Act. This is UK legislation that enables the UK to be a member of the European Union. Now, in all these outcomes, and in the negotiations between the UK and the EU, we may start to see a direction of what the future relationship will be between the UK and the EU. Obviously, neither one is going anywhere because of Brexit, and there will be a relationship between the two. Will it be a close one or a distant one, or close in some areas and distant in other areas? All that is coming in the future. And so this negotiation process may help illustrate that. But in the meantime, the UK remains a full member of the EU as of today and will remain that way until these steps occur. On the next slide here, I just want to explain how does Brexit affect supply chains and supply chain professionals. It really in many, many ways, but just in this one slide, some high-level ones are that the UK economy is Europe's second largest, and it's one of the largest in the world. And supply chains of most any size will likely have flows of information or finance or products or services somewhere touching the UK. And both UK and EU law broadly regulate supply chain flows of products and services, information and finance in the UK. And Brexit makes uncertain some of these flows. For example, the UK's continued free trade access to EU markets and vice versa, EU market access to the UK. Brexit makes uncertain the flow of people to and from the EU, and it makes uncertain some of the UK's legal and regulatory frameworks, particularly those that the EU handled on behalf of its member states. For example, the EU policy on unified patents throughout the EU. Brexit has short and long-term impacts, and some of the short-term impacts we're seeing right now, such as changes in currency values or asset values in the UK and elsewhere, shifts in political leadership, and also the mission to discover what is or is not affected by Brexit. For example, the UK aerospace industry and space policy. And is that an EU matter or a European Space Agency matter, ESA, which is not a member of the EU? Where does the line fall of what is or is not affected by Brexit? There is also a longer-term list of impacts for Brexit, and perhaps we're just starting to see those, but they are nowhere near finished. That would include issues such as asset siting or facilities or investments involving the EU, supply chain investments in facilities, for example, distribution and logistics planning, or supply chain and business strategies and strategy execution. So with that high-level overview of what Brexit is and how it affects supply chains, I'd like to jump into a series of questions that we'll have in this webinar. And I'll ask these questions in turn to each panelist. There'll be 3, and when we conclude with those, we'll get to your questions, you in the audience. And then we'll take as many as we can until time runs out. So I'd like to begin with question number 1. And this is, what is the one thing supply chain professionals need to know now? What is the one critical fact, piece of information, metric that is important for all supply chain professionals to know? And I'd like to begin with Sean. How would you answer this question?
Thanks, Jonathan. What is the one thing? I guess the number one thing, number 2 and 3 thing as well, would be not to panic or make any knee-jerk reactions. I mean, sometimes I think if you read the headlines, you believe that the UK is a country in crisis, which is absolutely rubbish. You know, it's facing a challenging change in circumstance, but not a crisis. If you look around the world, Turkey is a country in crisis, Venezuela is a country in crisis, Syria is a country in crisis. The UK at this moment in time most certainly is not. The new UK Prime Minister, Theresa May, she has clearly stated that Brexit means Brexit, so we have to assume that this will happen. However, the United Kingdom has always been a global maritime trading nation. It's been linked to every continent and archipelago. It's an island. Its people speak the world's business language. We have the world's 5th largest economy, the world's financial center located in the world's central time zone. It's stable, the rule of law is well established, and if nothing else, Brexit has proven that democracy is well and truly alive here. So we don't yet really know, as you rightly said, the nature of Brexit, but, and this seems to be a surprise to some people, we're not leaving Europe, only the institution of the EU. The option to change continents wasn't on the ballot paper, surprisingly enough. So nothing fundamental is going to change until Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty gets signed, and then we will have 2 years. We'll have 2 years to prepare for the transition. During this time, trade should continue as before, and skills will still be able to transfer across borders. And we're seeing already that some of the pre-referendum concerns are not manifesting themselves. So today, for example, the FTSE 250 regained its pre-Brexit levels. We had announcements from major organisations such as GlaxoSmithKline that they were nervous before the referendum, but now have just announced a 275 million investment in the UK. We've seen the Q2 GDP results come in, which show a growth of 0.6%. A couple of the major house builders have seen massive increase in their share prices because house sales are still rising despite what people were worried about. And we've also got the potential option to create a cut in corporation tax, which the Chancellor is debating at the moment, which should generate more investment in the UK. So things are not as bad as people maybe been led to believe, but we're still in a period of uncertainty, and we know that markets hate uncertainty. So until Article 50 is signed and we know exactly what the post-EU trading relationship is going to look like, we're guaranteed that uncertainty is going to remain, which may bring some currency and some economic jitters. And I think this is probably likely to be the biggest impact short term. However, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. And to be honest, I think the sterling's been overvalued for some time, especially against the dollar. So, I'd say it's more a case of coming down to its natural state rather than sort of like a collapse. In fact, this could actually be good news, specifically if you're a UK manufacturer. If you export, you'll become more competitive. If you're selling to domestic consumers, well, the change in exchange rate means there's been a sharp rise in people having what's called a staycation rather than a vacation. So they're staying holidaying in the UK because foreign holidays become a little bit more expensive. Plus, as you may have heard, there's an increased terrorist threat abroad, which has meant that certain people have decided not to take foreign holidays. And only last weekend we saw some very long queues going into the Eurotunnel, which has put a few people off having foreign holidays. So, domestic demand actually in the short term could well increase. But the line I always use is that you can't control what you do not understand. So if you act in haste, you may end up, as they say, repenting at leisure. And if I look back over supply chain's recent history, many companies sort of jumped on the bandwagon of offshoring their manufacturing to the Far East, specifically to exploit the lower cost of labour over there. And in hindsight, they ended up regretting it because they didn't understand the full facts of the equation of the decision that they made. And when they found that the total cost of this move was far greater than just the simple savings made in labour costs, so I'm talking about potential increases, very long increase in lead times, increased supply chain risks, decreased control, poor visibility into the extended supply chain, a reduction in agility and responsiveness. What they actually found was that these were much more painful than the initial cost savings were beneficial. So again, I would take that recent history. The biggest advice, therefore, would be to avoid taking any drastic actions until first you have full understanding of the facts of what exactly the Brexit situation means. So stay put and believe in Britain, I guess.
Sean, thank you very much for that. Jeff, how would you answer this question? What is the one thing supply chain professionals need to know now?
Well, I have to admit, after listening to Sean, I'm pretty impressed with all the things going on over there. But I like to answer from a global point of view, if I may. I don't believe currently there's anything in the space of a defined future state. Really, it's undefined, as Sean was saying. I do think I agree with this comment that we should never make, I'll say, a knee-jerk reaction. No different from some of the other catastrophes around the world. But I do think with this, all the different supply chains that really are out there, and all the different companies that are competing in the space, I think it means there's going to be a lot more focus on risk assessments. And so how people measure that and how it plays into the business plan would end up being my answer to that. How do you look at your risk, both short and long term, knowing that this may or may not happen, because it hasn't happened in different situations of past histories. So I do think that the risk management approach and the metrics that go behind that would be my one piece of information that we would have to know.
Okay.
Jonathan?
Yes, Jeff, thank you so much for that. Then finally, Richard, what's your take on this question?
Well, I think there's a couple of points which have already been made, which we do need to consider. First of all, if it's got European in front of it, as in front of its name, it doesn't mean that that is going to cease to exist after we exit the EU. The if you like, the European Union as such. So different bodies have been set up and running for years before even the invention of the EU. So you need to be very careful about what are the things which are covered by European regulations, as it were, and what are the things which are actually out of scope in this. And there's been a lot of confusion both here in the United Kingdom and also overseas in terms of understanding that. So if we're looking at things that you need to do, a couple of things. First of all is understand what is going to be impacted on by a potential exit from the European Union. I would suggest to people what you need to understand is where are your suppliers and where are your customers, because what you need to be able to do is to understand what are the trading flows within your supply chain. By doing that, you can then identify how exposed you are to changes in regulation. You can then be very proactive in terms of your risk management, because we are coming on to sort of perhaps talk about risk in a little bit more detail later on, but what we need to actually consider is the fact that we can be proactive about this. The interesting thing about Brexit is that we've actually got notice of this. It's not like a tsunami or a earthquake. We do know that things are going to change. So what we're then able to do is to actually understand the different scenarios which may take place. So one critical thing to understand, one metric, is just have a look at your supply base, work out where they're located. If you find out that most of your supply base is in the US and China, it may mean actually that your exposure to that risk is going to be different to if your supply base is based heavily in Europe, for example. And the same with your customer base. So you need to be able to think through that, understand where things are. And I think that, picking up on some of the things which Sean was saying is that, there's been a lot of doom, hashtag blame it on Brexit. People's cats are dying and they're blaming it on Brexit. Everybody's blaming everything on Brexit. This is just becoming a ridiculous situation, and we need to actually start thinking really logically and in a focused way about this. And I think that a lot of the concerns and worries that people have, when they actually start to analyse and get the data around this, they'll find out, well, maybe we're less exposed than we thought we were originally, or potentially we're slightly more. But what we can then do is we can put in contingency and understand that much earlier in the process. So, I think that that's the key thing. Understand where are your suppliers, get a physical structure map of your supply chain. This seems obvious, but I can tell you now, probably 90% of businesses do not have that information available to hand on one piece of paper which they can share with their board of directors.
Richard, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for answering this question. Very, very insightful. I'd like to move to question number 2. How is Brexit similar to or different from other supply chain risks? Brexit at the moment looks like a supply chain risk and a disruption because of this uncertainty, because of its broad impact, because of its effect on so many supply chain flows. And how is Brexit similar to or different from other supply chain risks and responses? And then what is the right risk management practice that would be most appropriate to respond to it? Now, I'd like to begin with Jeff to answer this question. Jeff, how would you answer question 2?
Well, this is an interesting one because of, I'll say, the long lead time potential on this one versus a natural issue like Japan had or Malaysia has had, or even government issues in Thailand in the past. I've had the opportunity to work in Asia and really to understand the impact on a global supply chain. And I think there's different actions that have to happen in each of these situations. But I will refer back to Quebec, Canada. Had a referendum 20 years ago, and for the guys that are my age, you'll understand that it didn't actually go away. It did change a whole bunch of our supply chains and how we did move our product in and out of Canada. I don't think it was a disaster, and so I do support what Jonathan and Sean, Richard, I'm sorry, and Sean are saying. I do think it comes down to, though, really understanding, I'm going to support what Richard said here, basically acceptable level of disruption that you're willing to put up with, or the cost that it implies. And I do think that's the first thing a lot of our corporations do not understand very deeply. We really don't do a good deep dive in risk assessment. We don't put a value to that, so therefore we can't show our customers what our actions are really meaning. And I do believe if we start to do that, and I'm talking from a global point of view because we are a global group, and the different supply chains will have different measures in there. I do think the risk management piece, going back to that, would be managed properly. It would actually help our supply chains do a better job of understanding, I'll say, our deep dive, our whole, sourcing initiatives. That's a great comment to make, and understand, do we want everything in one bucket, or do we want small buckets, and what's the cost of doing that? What's the disruption factor on the different supply chains? And it also depends on, raw material issues that we're having as well. How do we do that? But I want to finish by saying I am more concerned personally of the political impact this is going to have on all the other nations, looking at and focusing on what England is doing today, and trying to understand what does it mean for them. Is it like a national insourcing thing? How does it really impact it? I don't know. Maybe Donald Trump got his idea from them, but I don't know if that too is open for debate. Jonathan?
Thank you, Jeff. No, that's a really insightful response on this. There's so many ways to look at it. Richard, how would you answer this question? How is Brexit similar to or different from supply chain risk, other supply chain risks?
Well, I think that, looking at it through the perspective of, supply chain risk management, what we have to recognize is, as I mentioned before, first of all, we've got notice of this, and that's really important, because this then enables us to actually do various scenario plans around this. So, for example, what is going to be, if you like, I guess the lowest case, or the lowest terms we get, if you like, the worst case. I don't like using the worst case as a term, but what is the worst case scenario of the way that the UK fits into Europe? It might be on World Trade Organization rules. So what we're able to do is we could actually look at that and model the situation of all our suppliers in all our customers in, say, the EU, and all our suppliers having to operate in that type of situation when they're working with the United Kingdom. So what we can do is we can actually model that and see what is the impact of operating under those rules. Now, that, as I said, is the worst case. The best case is nothing at all is going to change. It might be that, the politicians do their job very effectively, because we have to remember is that by not having free trade effectively across Europe, that is going to impact Europe just as much as it is going to impact the United Kingdom. So I think there is quite a lot of motivation that we want to make sure that we're able to ensure that goods and services are able to be shared effectively. Now, the thorny issue which has come up in Brexit is the freedom of the movement of people. Freedom of the movement of people was originally put in there so that services could be traded across different environments. Because, at the end of the day, I'm a university professor and lecturer. I want to be able to travel and present and run workshops in other European nations, and that's a lot of what Cranfield does. I mean, we work globally. The point is, though, that there is a desire in countries for talent to be able to move freely. But I can, going into, for example, I don't know, France or Germany, to be quite honest, it's just the same as me going to Australia and the US. The only difference I find is that I have to actually do a little bit of pre-planning, as in I have to fill in and get an electronic visa and everything else. But unbelievably, that generally finds that I can move into those locations. If I'm flying into, say, the US or flying into Australia, recently I've been doing this, And I've actually found that I got into those countries quicker than I got into some European countries, and even quicker than getting into the United Kingdom. Why is that? That's because the processes have adapted for that type of environment. So the processes are in place so that talent can move and trade can take place. Now, of course, the thorny issue with what has actually happened in the UK is the freedom of the movement of people has then encouraged, you could argue, economic migration, where it's not talent that's being traded, it's more people just moving around. And of course that is, I think, the interpretation of a big part of the population in the United Kingdom, that you know, they're seeing that you know, people are moving and taking jobs from the United Kingdom was an argument which was being, you know, talked about amongst some, you know, some of the population. And of course that was then seen as a threat. But the key thing I would say, therefore, is it's different in the fact that we've got time to actually plan for it, but also at the same time we can do scenario planning. So if we find it's going to be harder to get talent, we can plan for that. If it's harder for us to do other things, we can plan for that. The simple way I look at it is what is the scenario for our processes? What is the scenario for our infrastructure and supply chain network? What is the scenario for the information flows and systems? And what is the scenario for our people and our organisation? And that includes that talent question. Understand, if you like, the worst case, and then look to the best case, and then have a few plans in between. Perhaps look at other countries. So look at how Canada has to trade with Europe. Look at how the US has to trade with Europe, or China has to trade with Europe. Look at those particular things, but also look for the opportunity, because where there's risks, there's opportunities. And a key thing here is rules are going to start changing. It's already on the BBC website. There is also already discussion with China about actually having, you know, free trade deals actually sorted out before even, you know, we come out of we Brexit properly. I think that's the way to put it. So already there is a lot of politicking going on to actually get trade deals with other countries sorted out. So with some countries, we could be in a far better situation.
Richard, thank you so much for that. Very insightful. Sean, I'd like to ask this question to you as well. How is Brexit similar to or different from other supply chain risks?
Thanks, Jonathan. I think my first point really is that, you know, it is definitely a risk and a disruption to business as usual, but it's also an opportunity. I think how it differs in very much in the same way that both Jeff and Richard pointed out, that we've had 2 years to prepare for it. So this is not an Icelandic volcano that suddenly exploded overnight and no one saw coming. This is not a tsunami hitting the coast of Japan or an earthquake off you know, Thailand or anything. You know, this is something we know is going to happen, and the only thing we don't know yet is the shape on it. Is it going to be the World Trade Authority rules? Are we going to take a Norway model, a Switzerland model, or are we going to have a completely unique British model, which I think is probably what they're angling for? So, but we know it's going to happen, and we have at least a minimum 2 years to prepare for it. It looks like 2017 is going to be the date when we sign Article 50. So, you know, you're talking a good, you know, 2.5 years. So we can see it coming. We know it's coming, and therefore, when it does come, it shouldn't really be a surprise to anyone. We can therefore plan in advance. As we talked about earlier, you know, the major issue now is uncertainty about what that model will look like. That's causing some jitters in things like the currency markets, but currency fluctuates all the time. And you know, if you take a real short-term view and you look at what's happened, say post Brexit, you can look at sort of graphs that say, oh, this is an absolute disaster. But if you take a long-term view and you look at the sort of currency against the euro or against the dollar over a longer term, you see that actually what we're doing is it goes up and down all the time, and so companies should be used to managing and mitigating against these deviations in exchange rates using processes like currency hedging. It shouldn't be a major issue for them. But Brexit does present a really good opportunity because it creates a burning platform. It presents companies with a really good reason why they should start to think more strategically and raise their eyes up, you know, out of the sort of day-to-day business and look forwards. So it's creating that compelling case of change, which John Cotter always talks about as being the sort of the major reason why how we make change happen is first we have to have a compelling reason for change. And I think Brexit can be used, as this compelling case for change. And I go back to my early point, which says, you can't control what you don't understand and you can't improve what you can't control. So companies need to make the time to really understand, what the different options here are, so we can analyse the macro factors, both that will affect our supply chains, both now and the future. But firstly, I would try to understand what those supply chains are. The point that Richard made about breaking them down into different segments, the different supply chains, understand the processes, the networks, the information, financial flows, and people in the organisation is absolutely critical. And to reinforce Richard's point, in my experience, dealing with supply chain transformation projects, doing school training around the world, most companies don't know that. They simply don't understand, how an end-to-end value chain is structured, or even what those value chains are in their business. They're very much functionally focused still. They're still in their own silos. So this gives us a real opportunity to look holistically at a business, break it down into the value chains, define the risks that affect them based on where we source goods from or where our customer is based, define the likelihood of them happening, what the potential financial impact could be, and we can use tools like in the score model, for example, we have value at risk there, so we can work out what the value at risk is and understand the different options are available. So it's all down to really understanding for each of the supply chains, where are our suppliers located, where are our customers, how are import duties going to be affected, what about export tariffs, understand which elements are likely to be hit in an adverse way by the Brexit changes, but also which ones are going to be positively impacted. And again, I'd like to reinforce Richard's point there that, opportunity-wise, just take a look at the different countries that are now lining up to do new trade deals with the UK. Don't just look at the impact it's going to have on your existing model, but consider whether there are any new opportunities that might arise when the UK is free to trade and create new trading relationships outside the EU. And once we really do know the details of what the Brexit model looks like, we can then start to focus on designing your future value chain for a post-Brexit world, rather than simply trying to protect an outdated pre-Brexit model.
Sean, thank you so much for that. These are such powerful answers. We could talk for an hour just on each one of these questions. I'd like to go on to our third and final question, which is, how can we prepare for the future? In other words, what other advice do you have to help our audience and their companies respond to the Brexit vote and create the future that we want to develop and arrive at? And really everything is fair game here. Supply chain planning, talent, improving competitive advantage, new markets, partnership relationships, everything. And I'd like to begin this time with Richard. How would you answer question 3? How can we prepare for the future?
Right, well, I mean, one of the things that, everybody's been saying, if we're looking at supply chain planning, we have got notice of this event which is going to actually take place. So one of the things that I would actually recommend that organisations start looking at is think particularly about some of the information flows. Because, at the end of the day, most organisations may be trading globally. The information flows are there, but what we want is seamless information flows. You don't want manual intervention all the time. A lot of the processes for going through customs, pre-notifying customs authorities of what's arriving and so on and so forth, try and get that managed, get it automated, and understand what's going on in your trading or getting goods into the country, but also sending stuff out to your customers. That's a really important thing because, as Sean's actually talking about, we've got a major opportunity here. It has created a burning platform, right? Rather like, remember all those years ago, Y2K, the year 2000, everybody was worried that all the computers were going to suddenly devour themselves or completely blow up or something. But a lot of planning actually went in, and that actually created a step change in supply chains because people updated their processes, updated the information systems, and really invested in some really useful technology which provided a foundation for them to do all sorts of new things. So there's a real opportunity in supply chain planning. Partner relationships, make sure they're strong. Talk to your suppliers. It may be now that the relationship is actually more important in terms of you know, things will become less transactional. So build relationships. That is just going to be good for the supply chain. You know, understand the nature of relationships and how to manage and prioritize relationships. I spend an awful lot of time with companies doing assessments of the different relationships that they have and how to deal with those relationships. So important. If I'm looking at talent, I want to reassure the talent I actually have within my organisations if it's a UK company. There's been a lot of misinformation, you know, people thinking all of a sudden that, you know, I'm working in the UK, I'm no longer going to be able to work in the UK. That won't be the case. You know, at the end of the day, just like in any situation, the UK needs talent. The UK is a global economy. It will attract talent from the globe. Including Europe. So things aren't going to change on that front. What we're going to actually find is that there may be, you know, a reduction in, you know, a reduction may be in economic migration, but the movement of talent will, you know, maybe challenged to some degree, but I don't think it will be. Improvement in competitive advantage, absolutely. There's new trade deals which can be done. Great new opportunities, as we've said, this burning platform. And I think that, you know, one of the organisations which I'm chairman of in the United Kingdom is the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. And I know that already our community of professionals are getting together and learning from each other. So I think that that's a really important thing. How can you prepare for the future? Well, you know, become a member of APICS, become a member of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, so that you can, you know, learn from that community. This is, to some degree, this is non-competitive. We all need to explore what opportunities there are, what threats there are, and therefore plan for them. So get engaged in this debate and really learn from each other, I think. I mean, as they say, perfect planning prevents pathetic or poor performance. So make sure we've got that in place. And final thing, bringing it back to the, you know, the cost of the business, develop the language of profit, understand your cost to serve, right? When you're going through all this mapping and understanding the nature of the impact on your supply chain processes, your infrastructure, your information flows in your organization, start getting transparency of that cost to serve, because there's going to be major opportunities to reduce the cost to serve particular customer groups, but it may increase other ones. If you've got transparency of that, you can really importantly be able to move forward and start actually focusing on the right areas. So those are the key things that I think. And you know, I'm after the Brexit shock. You know, I think it's fair to say the Friday of Brexit, nobody thought it was going to happen. I didn't think it was going to happen myself. I was, you know, in sort of for the morning, I was completely in shock. I really was. My productivity went down. But now when you actually start to back off from it, rationally think about it, this is an amazing opportunity for the United Kingdom, but also an amazing opportunity for many other countries in the world to start doing business differently with us. So as a supply chain professional, we can really exploit this opportunity and do some great stuff, which is actually going to help the global economy, help society as well, and also, I would argue, the environment as well. You know, that triple bottom line, if we go about this in the right way, we've got some real opportunities to create sustainability for everybody. So, you know, let's go for it. I'm really excited about what's coming up in the next few years.
Richard, thank you so much for that. Sean, how would you answer this question? How can we prepare for the future, given Brexit?
I'm tempted to just say ditto, Richard. I very much agree with a lot of what Richard said there, and I think, you know, he mentioned the word transparency, and I think that's absolutely critical. Moving forwards, having clear visibility of both your inbound and your outbound supply chain is an absolute must, because without that, it's going to be very difficult to correctly assess the risks and determine the best strategies for mitigation. And you know, what companies basically need to do, this is no different really to what I advise them to do anyway, regardless of Brexit, but it's the core advice, is to create a really deep understanding of the nature of the different supply chains in their business, both strategically and structurally. So, you know, again, here's a great opportunity for them to create a burning platform, take this as an opportunity to stop viewing the business as a whole, segment into clearly defined value chains, understand what they are, understand, the different products and services we sell to different customers, where we make money, where we don't make money. It's a great book, I Was a Prophet in a Sea of Red Ink by J.L. Byrne. He says that by any measure, 30-40% of any business is deeply unprofitable. It's just masked by the 10 to 20% that's highly profitable, but most companies just don't know. They don't know what's profitable and what's unprofitable, and this is a real opportunity for you to know, to get real transparency into business, understand, as Richard said, the profit flows, find out where we make money, and find out where we don't, and how we can change the trading relationships in those areas where we don't. But so I would use the sort of the advice that I would give as part of any sort of SCORE strategic initiative, which is first, understand your customers, what they value, where they are. And the S word, the strategy word. What is your strategy for delivering it? Is it responsiveness? Is it agility? Is it reliability? Have we got make-to-order items with high levels of innovation that we, reducing the lead time would be the focus, so we should be looking at localizing the supply chain? Or are they commodity traded goods whereby, we should be leaning it? Most companies take a one-size-fits-all model, a one-size-fits-all strategy, and have a one-size-fits-all supply chain. And this is their opportunity to think smarter and think much more strategically. Then understand, as Richard said, sort of financial information and the product flows for each of the value chains, from your supplier to your customer. What countries are involved, what partners are involved, what resources, talent is going to be affected, what tariffs are likely to change. Any companies that manufacture in the UK may find that their raw materials they import into the country might, because of currency fluctuations, become a little more expensive. Countries outside the UK who have UK suppliers may find it advantageous to lock in long-term price contracts with them. When the facts of Brexit are known, this may precipitate a move to more local sourcing, and companies may decide that they need more local inventories, opening new facilities and positioning finished goods stocks in the different trading areas that may help them overcome any obstacles to the movement of people or goods, although I don't think they're going to be half as bad as they've been made out to be. But I would really think one of the great opportunities here is to take is to raise your eyes up and take a longer-term perspective. So I do a lot of work about, and Richard would know this because he's been in the audience and listened to this a couple of times, about automation, the impact on automation and disruptive technologies. If we think forwards, stop thinking about the current world and the future world. What about the rise of automation? Will this help reduce the impact of the need for low-cost labour? Can drones, autonomous vehicles and robotics replace unskilled and semi-skilled labour? Will near zero cost last mile delivery mechanisms offset any other costs? The whole world is changing at an exponential rate, and some of the things we think are very important right now might not be that important moving forwards. So I think most importantly, before making any decisions, break your business into value chains, and you use tools like PESTLE analysis, political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental. Understand the macro factors that are affecting each of the value chains, and look at what's going on around here. I mean, people seem to think that voting to remain in the EU was a vote to the status quo. Well, there isn't a status quo. How safe is the Eurozone? What happens if Greece needs another bailout? What happens if the Italian economy collapses? What would that have the impact on the Euro and all the countries that are tied to the Euro? How stable is that? If you're making short-term decisions right now with imperfect knowledge, and you could be going simply from the frying pan into the fire. And again, I re-emphasize the point that I made earlier about the new trading relationships. That that we had certain, to our US colleagues, we had the president of the US come over and say, yeah, hey, you guys, you'll be at the back of the queue when it comes to creating new trading relationships. Now, suddenly that's, that's not the back of the queue. They obviously want to wait until we understand the nature of the Brexit arrangements, but the US is prepared to deal with us. So, but that's also got the whole Commonwealth, the whole Anglosphere looking now and saying, we weren't too happy back in 1973 when you joined, you sort of forego relationships with us for relationships with our European partners. Now, however, we'll welcome you back with, open arms. We speak the same language, we have the same culture, Australia, Canada, India, basically they're all now looking to sign new trading arrangements. So there is an opportunity for companies to think outside of their current value chains and out to where they can move these value propositions to these new countries. What opportunities are out there that previously we couldn't address because the UK was bound to the needs and wants of 27 other countries. So, to me, there's no reason why the future for the UK should not be both international and incredibly positive. And I would just advise companies to, prepare your supply chains for that future model and not just to retain the current one.
Sean, thank you so much for that. Jeff, what's your take on this question? How can we prepare for the future?
Well, I agree that both Sean and Richard have done a great job of getting into the details. And so I will say ditto. I think it's very well explained. To start off, as Sean kind of said, I think the number one issue that people in our positions need to do is one is to raise awareness inside our own organizations, and then start talking about how does it really impact the business. So from a very practical point of view, because most people on the phone, I'm sure, kind of like me, they go to work every day. We're trying to help our supply chains and manufacturing environments get better. So how do we help our senior leadership really understand the impacts and what we need to do? Personally, that means to me, how do I improve the training on my teams through the organization, for example? Perfect example, how do people really understand the details behind it? I do think we got to brush off, in my case, our own risk management process. We need to really do a little bit better job. I am in charge of that too, so that's on me. I do think the business planning process and things like our sales and operation planning activities really needs to be looking at the impacts and making some assumptions either way. And again, that should be a driver that we all take back to our organizations. And I'll just reiterate what both the other gentlemen have said, improve the relationships with the whole supply base. I'm also going to throw in there things like our 3PLs, not just the suppliers, but who are our key partners and how do we win together so we can create a little bit more win-win. So those are kind of the 5 activities that I would leave. So Jonathan, back to you, sir.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone on the panel for answering these questions. These are big, broad, meaty questions, and I think we've had some real insights. Just the researching mind in me, before we get to the audience questions, I just want to explain what I've been hearing and just see if that's the same for everyone. I've really been hearing that Brexit makes a good reason to make broad improvements to supply chain management practices. I've been hearing words such as discover, understand, visibility, strategy, value. So a broad-based improvement in our supply chain practices is what Brexit could indeed be triggering. All right, well, we have a whole range of questions from the audience, and I'd like to just jump right on into them with the amount of time we have left. And the first question is for Sean. It's from Declan, and the question is, when will we have the full facts as to what Brexit means? And isn't it difficult to make investment decisions until the unknowns are known?
I think the prediction is that we will know the shape of the Brexit deal early 2017. As I said earlier, Theresa May, our new Prime Minister, has very clearly said 2 things. One, Brexit means Brexit, and secondly, we will make a success of it. So I think she's gone out with a very clear intention that we are going to leave the EU, and that we're doing so with the view to be successful. Is it difficult to make investment decisions? I think it really depends on the nature of investments. As I said in my starting comment, there are certain things that are not going to change. This is going to continue to be, and I hope, the 5th largest economy in the world. It will be a fully international trading company. It will have the world's financial centre. I don't think that's going to change at all. The house market is still looking positive. So all the signs are that we are not going to face a major economic collapse. Almost certainly there will be jitters during the period of uncertainty, and there may be some movement immediately post any decision that's made. We don't know yet whether or not we're going to completely exit from the single market or whether or not we're going to try and retain single market membership. So do you not make an investment decision? I don't see why it should prevent you making any investment decisions, because I think the domestic market is going to retain. It's the level of consumer purchase is probably going to remain. Its international trading capabilities is hopefully going to be enhanced because of the new trading relationships and the new deals. German car manufacturers are still going to want to sell us German cars. French people are going to still want. French farmers are going to want to sell us their wine, cheese, and food. it's been very clear, from the messages that are coming out of, say, the German manufacturing industry, that they've instructed, Angela Merkel, whatever you do in terms of the deal with Brexit, don't cut your nose off to spite your face here. We value enormously the UK market, and the UK market and the UK manufacturers value enormously the EU trading relationships. So, let's be professional and grown up about this and create a relationship that works for everyone. So, do you or do you not make an investment decision? I guess depends very much on the nature of the investment decision and what industry you're thinking of. But in terms of having faith in the UK, I would just again point to news companies like GlaxoSmithKline again today, who were making noises that said that we're not really sure about the UK post if they Brexit, if they vote to leave, and they immediately are saying, actually, we have full confidence in the UK. Regardless of the shape and nature of the Brexit deal, we have full confidence, and we are making this £275 million investment. You also had news today about the major infrastructure investments on things like the extension to the City of London Airport, which is going to create 2,000 new jobs and several £100 million worth of investment. I see no reason why someone shouldn't look at the United Kingdom as a very positive investment decision. But I would have to know the details of that to know, whether or not it would be affected by any currency or, or market jitters that might occur up until the point we know the exact shape of the.
Sure, it may be. I mean, I'm just currently looking at, GlaxoSmithKline's decision. And I think the key thing about investment decisions is not just about where there are a number of factors which come into this. Brexit is one element in a whole range of different factors. I mean, what they're saying here is that the UK is an attractive location, and the reasons for that is there's a skilled UK workforce, for example. So the skill side of things, the talent is here to be able to make that work. The tax regimes are also particularly positive. So it's a lower tax regime than other environments. So what they're doing is, and also they're saying most of the stuff which they're going to be manufacturing is going to be exported anyway. And I guess what they've done here is very quickly look at, what are the various scenarios, and they're saying, well, hang on a minute, there is an opportunity here, so we're going to carry on investing. And I think that, that's actually quite, that's quite a positive view on this. We have to recognise, the impact of Brexit on many organisations, big global organisations. To be quite honest, you're importing and exporting stuff around the world anyway. Yes, there is a debate for the pharmaceutical industry about, wanting to have facilities located actually in Europe. But I think that debate will be, sorry, not in Europe, in the EU. Be careful, we are still in Europe. So we just have to think through that, and I think that this is where people are being pragmatic about it. This isn't the be-all and end-all. The fact we're Brexiting, it will have some impact, but that impact might be actually quite small in comparison to some of the other issues that you're looking at, like your workforce or tax regimes and various other things.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Totally agree.
All right, thank you for that. Let's see, question number 2, and it's from Sunil, and the question is, post-Brexit, would there be an adverse impact on any specific industry or sector, say manufacturing or construction, etc., as opposed to certain other sectors? Richard, I'd like to start with you and then perhaps see if Sean has any insights to add on this.
I'll be quite frank, I think the industries which may be impacted on more are those which don't thrive on uncertainty. I think that's the easiest way to say it. There are some industries which find challenges on uncertainty. So at the moment, of course, we haven't got the figures yet for how things are actually going to be taking place. We've heard about a bit of a slump in housing and maybe some building, for example, people have been talking about. I think the biggest impact at the moment has been the change in the pound. that has impacted on some organisations like fashion houses who are, getting goods manufactured overseas and then it's being imported. They're concerned about that because, of course, the cost of their raw materials or their clothing is going up by 10%, which you could argue if they carry on selling them at the same price, it means they're going to be making less money. So I think that maybe just from the currency changes, that might be the big thing to keep an eye on at the moment. What industries are most exposed to currency changes? So it might be those industries which actually have an awful lot of imported goods at the moment. They're spending a lot of their a lot of their supply base is basically outside the United Kingdom, and maybe we can draw some things there. But at the moment, we're not really seeing the evidence. But it is only 1 month since this decision has been made, so I think it's watch this space. We need to do that analysis. We keep going back to this analysis. As supply chain professionals, we've got to understand, where are our suppliers, where are our customers, and really understand our exposure from that. I haven't done it for all industries, so I'm sorry I can't be more specific, but those are my thoughts on it at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that there's some good points. Sorry, Jonathan, the only area I think of, the ones that we're talking about predominantly that might be impacted heavily might be some of the ones that rely very heavily on very low-cost labour. Migrant labour, people who are prepared to work for rates of pay that potentially are beneath the sort of welfare limits in the United Kingdom, and so the migrant labour that moves in from some of the Eastern European countries to do work there. They're Stuart Rose, who was the leader of the sort of Remain campaign, sort of said, well, one of the things that will happen post-Brexit if it decides to leave is that wages will rise, and the UK government has recently introduced a higher minimum wage level. So it might find that the cost of products might rise because of an increase in the cost of low-cost labour, because of if we move outside the single market, the ability for people, not labour, so people without a job to move across the border, who do not have any meaningful employment waiting for them, might be constrained, and that might cause a rise in the cost of labour in the United Kingdom. But I'll go back to my previous point that says actually, if you also look at some of the macro points like the amount of robotic automation that's taking place in the farming industry, that is potentially going to mean that it's going to operate at the cost of electricity, which is somewhat lower than even the lowest cost labour. What price low cost labour if you don't need labour? Means that there are other alternatives to just simply throwing your hands in the air and saying we're going to have to pass the prices back onto the consumer. So again, I think to Richard's point, you need the full facts here, and you need to look outside of the simple Brexit impact to other macroeconomic impacts that are also affecting that industry.
Sean, I know you've got an excellent example around, I think it was a sports goods manufacturer who relocated their supply chain into Europe recently, and just the reduction in the number of people who were actually employed in that supply chain because of just highly automated robotics and everything else. I think it might be worth sharing that, because that can give us a bit of a picture of how these things. It's not an easy answer, is it?
No, it's not, and you've got things like sort of Rethink Robotics bringing out things like the Baxter robot, which previously robots were dumb and simple and very dangerous, and now they're becoming incredibly advanced, and they're becoming platforms for software where they can be redirected to be multi-purpose. And Nike a couple of years ago reshored. I mean, reshoring is a big movement, as we know at the moment. So companies are finding out that actually, they need to localize their supply chain. And if we look at I just finished writing and just published a massive article on what Amazon's doing. If you look at Amazon as an example, and the way they are, both using a platform to capture all the different demand signals, but also using automation to replenish those demand signals. And we've just seen in the news that they've just got the trials approved to do the drone deliveries in the UK, but also they're rolling out into the UK now the Kiva robotic systems, which is fully automating their factories. They are rolling out you know, the Amazon Echo device that's allowing people to order by voice. We've got Prime Now deliveries. We've got other things going on like Starship robotic delivery system, so it's removing that sort of last mile delivery. We've got autonomous vehicles and autonomous trucks being rolled out by Daimler and Volvo. So we've got a whole host of macro technological innovations that are really saying that, you know, rethink your value chain, or someone else will take your business model away from you by rethinking it instead. And I think the example that you were thinking of, I think was, I remember the presentation I did for the Chartered Institute was, you know, I think Nike reshored its a lot of its manufacturing, and we're 105,000 people, contract manufacturers, used to make their shoes. They then reached to, I think the new jobs that were created in the US was around 50. So they effectively removed, you know, 104,950 jobs, you know, by using automation to do that task, which was cheaper than the low-cost labour and involved, you know, a lot less transportation costs, a lot less risk. You know, visibility into the supplier was reduced, improved by the reduction of sort of nodes. So there are so many different macroeconomic things going on, and technology is probably at the heart of it, that you can't just look at the, you know, the status quo is everything's the same apart from the things that Brexit affects, like labour costs. There are other things going on. So to the point we made earlier, you know, take this as a golden opportunity to step back and really consider all the different technologies and legalities that are changing around your value chains and how you should position yourself for the future. Just don't base it off the one criteria of things like labour costs, because that might not be true moving forwards.
Okay, Sean and Richard, thank you so much. I know we're right at our time limit, but if we can just squeeze in one more question, question 3, and I believe this one should be for Jeff, and it's from Chen. What impact will Brexit have on a company's supply chain strategies? Strategies such as just-in-time, or hybrid, or agile, will they be affected?
Well, the answer is no. The answer is no, because if you do the long-term planning that we're all talking about and you get into the deep dive, your strategy level will not be specific. Well, I guess it depends if you're in England or not, or you're across the water. But if you're doing a global look at this, your strategy won't change because of one source. Your strategy will change if you decide as an organization, though, you want to make, I'll say, some strategic directional change. Back to the cost to serve comment was made earlier. I believe, though, it's an input, and you should look at all your different strategies inside your business planning cycle. But to assume, again, from a global point of view, you're going to change your strategies, I don't think that's going to be the case from a global point of view, unless there's I'll say, a lot of suppliers or supplies going in and out of that region. So, actually, that's a great question. Either other two gentlemen, do you want to answer that? Would you agree or disagree? Just real quickly.
Very, very quickly, I think what we have to recognise now, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, levels of uncertainty are increasing, levels of volatility are increasing, and so therefore, I guess very traditional linear structures and supply chain approaches will need to adapt. So I think we're going to need more of an agile, flexible approach. You know, manufacturing in local markets, maybe manufacturing and moving vanilla products into those local markets. But we've got technology as well, which is coming on stream. So, you know, the concept of 3D printing is allowing people to manufacture things much closer to the environment as well. So I think that, you know, Brexit is it's one of those things that everybody's got very excited about. Actually, I think that if we're looking at supply chain strategy, for many organisations, there are actually bigger things we need to deal with and to gain advantage from, which are out there already. And I think that is an important point, that for UK companies and European companies, we mustn't become obsessed about Brexit. Actually, what we need to do is we need to look around at how technology is actually changing, going back to what Sean was talking about, and looking at the way that those opportunities can be exploited as well. And just one warning, because the power of the supply chain manager, the power of the supply chain director, remember that the decisions that you make have a big impact on society. by relocating something or near sourcing something, how is that going to impact on other societies around the world? By changing the way that the offering that you do. So if everybody buys everything online in the UK, that means we'll have no shops or town centres, right? It could be very good for the environment as well. There's been research which we've been supporting at Cranfield School of Management, which has found that environmentally you can have actually 20 home deliveries rather than you getting in your car and going and picking the stuff up in terms of the CO2 output, for example. So it's good environmentally. Profitability, some of these things we're still trying to work out whether we can make money out of this, but the point is that people in organisations are making decisions which are actually going to have big impacts on our society, big impacts on our global economy and profitability, and also big impacts on the environment. So we need to actually think through that, and I think that this really, and it's something which I'm encouraging the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport to think about, is that you might feel as though you're disempowered, but actually the decisions that you're informing and making have significant impact on on the planet. So we need to really sort of bear that in mind.
All right. Thank you so much. I'd like to greatly thank our panel for making the time and for their wonderful answers, and I'd like to thank our audience for attending this webinar and for your hard work in the practice of supply chain management. My thanks again to everyone who made this webinar possible, including the technical team, and please look forward to more Brexit news and coverage from APICS. A recording of this webinar will be available at the web link you see there, apics.org, online events. And for more APICS coverage more Brexit coverage from APICS, please look for that in the APICS e-news and the Thinking Supply Chain blog. So again, thank you very much for your attendance, and this is Jonathan Thatcher saying goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Richard Wilding signing off.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you to our panelists for their time today, and of course, thank you for Jonathan for a great moderating job. Just a quick question, or just a quick one more thing for everybody. Thank you for everyone who joined us and stuck around with us this long. If you have a couple more minutes, we do have a brief survey that will pop up as you exit our webinar platform, just to let us know how we did, and we appreciate your feedback. All content and materials included in this edition of the APICS webinar are the property of APICS and the Cranfield School of Management and are protected by the United States and international copyright laws. All rights are reserved. Thank you so much for joining us today.